With great power comes great responsibility.
Compromise where you can. Where you can't, don't. Even if everyone is telling you that something wrong is something right. Even if the whole world is telling you to move. It is your duty to plant yourself like a tree, look them in the eye and say no. You move.
Never step onto the battlefield of ideas unprepared. Before you enter the fray, you need a plan. And there's no better place to get one than right here on Tactics with host Caleb Colquitt. The Situation Room goes live now on News Radio 1440.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Tactics. We appreciate you listening to us every day right here on News Radio 1440. As always, I'm your host, Caleb Colquitt, and we appreciate you listening into Tactics, where speech isn't violence, tolerance isn't love, and disagreement isn't hate. Welcome to the program, and it is Thursday, and everybody knows what that means. If you've been a fan of the show for any amount of time, that means we have a special guest on, because it is during the legislative session. So we go right now to the one and only Becky Gerritson of Eagle Forum, Alabama. Welcome to the program, Becky.
Thank you for having me back for week 3 of the legislative session.
I know, it's, it feels like it's barely been going on, but there has been quite a bit of action early on. We're kind of in that stage, though, that they're more setting the schedule of what they're going to be talking about instead of, actually moving on a lot of the legislation. Is that a correct synopsis of that?
Yeah, it's funny. There were a lot of public hearings yesterday, so it seemed like we were just running from room to room. But then you look at all the bills that are passed, and sometimes you think, gosh, it's taken forever to get this stuff done. And then also as we progress towards the session, then the nights get longer and longer. Right now, they left today at before 1 o'clock. But in the next few weeks, you'll see they'll be here till 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock. So I just wish they would get the business done as quickly as possible and leave.
Yeah, well, I mean, that would be great, but that would also be logical and efficient, and government can't be either of those things. So
yeah.
But there is actually some things that we need to talk about, and a couple things I wanted to ask you about. And I know that Eagle Forum doesn't follow absolutely everything that goes through the legislature, but I wanted to see if y'all had a take on this. What is your take on Senator Barfoot's bill, SB 106, for charter schools on military bases catering to military families?
Well, it's interesting. I have seen several things about it, and it's been on my radar for a couple of weeks. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to sit down and talk to him. I haven't read the bill yet, but my question to him was going to be, I don't understand how that doesn't have to go through the Charter School Commission. And maybe once I read the bill, I'll figure that out. But we have a special Charter School Commission, so I don't understand how this gets to bypass that. So maybe next week I'll have an answer for you.
Okay. So what were the big stories this week? What have you been working on this week?
Okay. And for those of you who aren't signed up for our weekly updates, I would encourage you to go to alabamaeagle.org. Across the top, you'll see a tab that says something like Get Active, and click that and then sign up for our emails. And every Friday I send out an email on the bills that we're watching. I give you a status update. If there's an action that needs to be done, like a phone call that needs to be made, those directions will be in there. But from what we've been watching, the things that have moved this week, Representative Pringle has a bill in the House that would not allow males in high school to compete in female sports.
Right.
And so I actually was able to testify at that hearing yesterday. It did pass out of committee on party lines. But my testimony really focused on the physiological difference between boys and girls. And there really is a difference. They're faster, they have larger hearts, larger lung capacity, broader shoulders. I have a lot of statistics on how in sports, men do better than women, and it just doesn't seem fair that men can come over to the women's sports and begin stealing scholarships and that sort of thing. So what was interesting about that testimony, well, there were a lot of things that was interesting. I have a hard time as a woman not wanting to support women's rights. This is about protecting women's sports. And just yesterday, yesterday or this morning came out an article of parents suing in Wisconsin, and actually some Iowa students have sued because the boys are taking over their sports and they're losing scholarships. And so we wanted just to protect the women here from having that happen.
So, if you're talking about two different stories here from Wisconsin and Iowa, and then we already knew about the ones from Connecticut and New Jersey. So now we've got 4 other states dealing with this, and it seems as though this legislation is somewhat designed to just kind of head this problem off at the pass before we have to deal with it.
Yes. And one of the things, the Human Rights Campaign director for Alabama testified yesterday, born a man, is now a transgender woman. And she said it's not fair because these kids have probably taken some hormone treatments and that sort of thing. And so now they are more like a girl and should be able to compete. But my problem with that argument is they have not been on hormones long enough. And even if they are on hormones, they still have the characteristics of a man, and they still have bigger lungs. They still have a lot, even though their hormones may be they may have more estrogen in their bodies now than they had before. They still are outperforming the women. So I didn't think his argument that's good enough.
That's not a compelling argument at all. And I'm going to throw in some of my ag major expertise. Do you know what the difference is between a bull and an ox?
The name, the spelling?
No, it's a good guess. And I didn't expect you. No, actually, a bull has his testicles, an ox does not.
Okay.
And the reason that there's a differentiation between an ox and a steer, because a steer has also been castrated, is a steer is raised for meat production. And because you want more tender meat, you actually castrate them before they hit puberty. An ox, you wait until after puberty. And so what happens is that ox is better suited for working because his muscles have already developed because he underwent puberty. And so if we're talking about a trans athlete that's already 15, 16, 17, that is going to be going through the transition, and granted later, the later it is, the less relevant the estrogen is going to make an effect. You can pump them as full of estrogen as you want. You could chemically castrate them even if you wanted to, and cut off their supply of testosterone to a great degree. But if their body has already developed for 5-6 years of puberty with the testosterone present in their system, they're going to be relatively just as strong as your regular man. Just like an ox is as strong as your regular bull, despite the fact that one's been castrated, one wasn't. It's the time that takes place.
That totally makes sense. So, right. Yeah, that's awesome. I love that analogy, and I will be using that in the future. All right.
Well, I'm glad I could help out.
Absolutely.
Speaking of this bill, did you hear John Rogers' testimony about when he was commenting on the Girl Act?
Yes. Oh, well, if it was in the committee, yes, I did hear him, and he thought he was bringing it back to civil rights.
Yeah. The part that really struck out to me, though, is he basically kind of suggested that what we ought to be doing is giving mandatory gender testing to the athletes, and then we should only allow them to compete in the sport in which their genes match their gender, which isn't that what the Girl Act is trying to do? I mean, not the mandatory testing part, but he kind of made the Republicans' argument for them that what we should be doing is going with the biology as opposed to, whatever the
outward.
Yeah. So it was odd. I think that, John Rogers, honestly, he's an old school Democrat. I really just think he doesn't understand what a trans person is based on the way he said it. Because he seemed to think it was talking about intersex people or hermaphroditic people.
Yeah, and I think last week he thought it was about gays.
Right.
So, right, yeah. I think you might have brought that up on the show last week. So
I did, but it was just ironic to me that he basically made the Republicans' argument for them while explaining why he's not voting for the bill.
Well, I do expect this to be out on the House floor probably in the near future, but sometimes the speaker doesn't want to bring out controversial bills, so they may wait until the very end to bring this one up. Again, it was party lines that it happened in the committee. So we expect that to happen on the floor. But I would just encourage your representatives, if you want to be fair to girls and support women's rights, then ask them to please pass this bill. That would be great.
Well, and that's really what it all boils down to as well. And that's the thing that a lot of people kind of gets lost in because, it can be an emotionally charged issue. The whole reason we invented women's sports in the first place is so women had a even playing ground to compete against other people. Because, back in the day, golf and tennis were really the only sports that were considered feminine enough for women to compete in. And over time, we started developing things like women's basketball and women's lacrosse and that kind of thing. And the reason we had those is because it wasn't fair for them to compete against the boys. So, I mean, if we want to do that, we might as well get rid of women's athletics entirely, because it defeats the purpose if men can compete. One thing I wanted to ask about too, and I know that this one has been floated around. I was reading an article about this one earlier. Apparently, Alabama has a Born Alive bill that is now on the floor. What's the progress of that one?
Okay, it's been assigned to a committee, and I want to say it was the health committee. Don't totally quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure it was the health committee. It was on tap to be discussed yesterday. However, it never was. So I'm sure they're carrying it over until next week. This is the same bill that was there last year that died at the end. But if there's a botched abortion,
right,
and the baby survives, then it must be revived or taken to the hospital. And so basically, I don't think there have been any changes to that bill. As far as I know, it is the same bill as last year. Again, this is a great one to support.
Sure.
So it seems like a no-brainer to me, but
what
do I know, right?
Yeah, that's the thing that really just blows my mind, and we're actually going to talk about this in a minute. I'm going to be talking about an issue that deals with abortion once we're done with this segment here. It amazes me that the Democrats have largely opposed these, not just in the state of Alabama, but in several other states where they've been proposed, because they keep saying, well, we just want abortion up until the point of, this isn't even before birth. Like, if you're saying as soon as the baby's born, we're all about the baby and want to take care of the child, and Republicans, they don't care about the baby unless it's in the womb. Once it's born, they don't care about it. It's like, well, if that's your talking point, shouldn't you all be in favor of the Born Alive bill?
Right.
It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I agree with you.
So one other thing that I wanted to ask about, and I know that it's slightly outside Eagle Forum's wheelhouse, so if you haven't read up on it, I understand. Right now there is a Senate bill to prevent Montgomery's occupational tax. Have you heard anything about that?
Someone stopped me in the hall to talk about that, and I had to run somewhere real quick, so I never finished the conversation. No, I don't have any. It did pass the city council, though, yesterday, right? Yesterday or the day before?
Right. The bill passed the city council for the occupational tax to happen, but the Senate bill that would counter it, as far as I know, it's still kind of in limbo right now.
Yeah, that will be interesting how that will play out. I'll have to check on that this coming week. But yeah, I knew that it had passed at the city council level. I just didn't realize that they're going to try to counteract it in the Senate.
Yeah.
You said is it Barfoot? Is it Will Barfoot that has that?
No, I did mention Barfoot, but I'm pretty sure I was mentioning him because of the charter schools. Maybe that one's Barfoot too.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because he's Montgomery. I would imagine it would have been him, but who knows?
Yeah, I'd have to look that up, and I just got to claim ignorance on that one. I don't know which senator is sponsoring that one.
Okay. Another big bill that was really took a lot of the news media yesterday was the marijuana bill.
Right.
Was in the Senate committee yesterday. 4 people spoke for it. 4 people spoke against it. And it did pass. We had one Republican that voted against it. Larry Stutz, he's a doctor, Senator Dr. Stutz, voted against it.
Okay.
One other Republican abstained. And then I think the rest were all yeses. Now, what I thought was really interesting, they added a few amendments. I want to say 6 amendments to it that some had to do with workers' comp, and they kind of wanted to, make all of the lobbyists happy. So there were a few deals that were made that I don't think were really change the substance of the bill too much. But here are my problems with this bill.
Sure.
It is lacking in, it says medical grade marijuana, but there's no definition. So medical marijuana and recreational marijuana are the same thing.
Right.
Just one has the word medical in front of it. It's the same. It is the same thing. So my question is, and why is it not in the bill? Why are there not percentages? Are we talking 3% THC? Are we talking 6%, 9%? That is not specified in the bill. And to me, that is a huge red flag or green flag, whatever you want to say.
It's like when legislators try to make bans for assault weapons when an assault weapon is not a real designation. Yeah, so I can get how maybe just, if nothing else, a little clarification, a little definition there written into the law might be helpful there.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, someone had made a great point that just because it has the word medical in it doesn't mean it's medicine. You don't call it medical Tylenol. You don't call it whatever, medical Flexeril, or, it just because it says medical marijuana does not make it a medicine. But there's another thing that I think is interesting, and we may have talked about this last week. There are no standard dosages in the bill. So if a doctor is treating PTSD or a sleep disorder or a cancer nausea, they just get to guess. Oh, I guess it could be, you'll take this many milligrams. Well, okay, what's the percentage? Are we talking, again, 3%, 9%? What's the THC level? And then is it going to be pills, suppositories, ointments, lozenges? They all have different absorption rates. And you know what qualifies a doctor to be able to prescribe this? A 4-hour class. They take a 4-hour class and a test on that class, and the class cannot cost more than $500, and you are a qualified doctor to give marijuana, who knows how much THC is in there, to 15 different conditions right now. It'll be more later. To me, that is irresponsible. And this is one of the problems that we have with the bill.
Well, and here's the thing. For me, as a libertarian-leaning person, I'm sympathetic, and also a cancer survivor that had really bad nausea. I'm sympathetic to the argument that if that treatment exists and is out there and it works, that there should be some kind of legal way to get to it. But the concern for me has always been that we turn into a California where basically anybody that wants it can get it. And based on some of the things I'm hearing out of this bill, it sounds like we're going to be a lot closer to that than this thing being some kind of prescription medication like Phenergan or something like that.
Well, and see, what I would love is they were talking about Lenny's Law and Carly's Law that established a special clinic in Birmingham, to deal with these children with epilepsy. And they were prescribed CBD oil, and it was all under a doctor's care where they could document and actually sort of like have a study going on. Well, they want to extend that. Or, they say we need medical marijuana because we need higher strength THC for these kids. And my whole thing is, then let's do it in that clinical setting. Let's grow that program. Instead of just opening it wide to the state, let's do it under really tight supervision where you can be documenting the best methods of treatment rather than just these dispensaries that are going to prop up all over the place. And, somebody who paid $500 and took a 4-hour class is going to be able to prescribe this. This just doesn't make sense to me.
Right. And then you wind up with what happened the other day with and I hate to, bring this up being an Auburn fan, former quarterback, what was he? Halfback? Quan Bray got caught with 157 pounds of marijuana.
My husband just sent me that text. There
were
two Auburn guys, right? That got caught.
It was two, but Quan Bray was,
I think.
Quan Bray was the big name. The other one was not as well known. But I'm just thinking, 157 pounds of marijuana. That's a whole human being of marijuana.
Yeah, that's crazy.
But yeah, you don't want them. That might be what we would call excessive. You don't want doctors being able to prescribe that.
Right. So I expect, Caleb, this will probably be on this. I would assume this will be on the Senate floor next week.
Okay.
It passed last year through the Senate very easily. So it probably will again. It will have more problems in the House.
Right.
Let me tell you, though, there are marijuana lobbyists everywhere at the State House. There's huge money going into this. At several of the hearings, even over the summer, during the commission meetings. I sat next to a lobbyist and grower from Florida. Another one came in from Tennessee. So
do they have
there's
dreadlocks?
A lot of money. No, they actually they don't have green hair. They actually look pretty professional and kind of look like everybody else up there.
So they're not walking in there with sweats and a giant bag of Doritos. They actually.
Now that happens during the hearings, the public hearings.
Okay.
Yes, you can tell who wants it legal and who doesn't. It's a dead giveaway there. So
I got you. Well, so you're saying this thing has a lot of support from the lobbyist side.
Yes, huge support from the lobbyist side. So, and they are up there. They're working very hard. They were working off season as well. So it's going to be harder to kill it this year than last year.
Right.
I still think we have a chance in the House. And look, I am compassionate and like you talking about, going through cancer and
sure.
I would love to be able to use some of these treatments, but I really want to see it done in a clinical setting where we can actually get some data from it that will help us better than just, it's going to be a free for all, I think, as it is in many, many states.
And the thing is, and I don't want to beat a dead horse about this at all, but I think that that's part of the problem that you're running into, because you do have some people probably on the pro marijuana side that are just like you and me that do want this treatment to be available. We want it to be accessible to the people that actually need it. Because I mean, like I said, I went through cancer, chemo nausea, and it's awful. And if I thought that this thing was going to help, you better believe that I would take it in a heartbeat, if nothing else, just to try it out. But at the same time, you also have people that are on the pro side of this bill that they say that they want medical marijuana, but what they really want is a foot in the door of full-on legalized recreational marijuana. And so you're kind of having to, I imagine, parse through that. Okay, what parts of the bill have been put in or been suggested by people that legitimately do want this for medical purposes, and which ones are just trying to act as a shoe-in for legalized recreational marijuana?
Right. Right. And I think there are a lot of them out there. And during the summer, during one of the committee meetings, one of the commission meetings, they were Facebook Live. They had Facebook Live, and I happened to be watching the feed. I was in the room while it was happening, and I was taking screenshots of their conversations back and forth with each other. And I still have them saved on my phone. And one of them was, we need to pass this. We need to pass it medically and turn right around and go for recreation before they even know what hit them. I mean, they were like talking on a thread about this.
Right.
So, there are a lot of them out there that definitely do want it as recreation. But I know that, the sponsor of the bill in the Senate, it says, I really don't want it for recreational purpose. I really want to help the people. And I get all that, but I still would love to see it in a clinical setting.
Sure, and I understand that, and this is one of those things that it's really hard to put that genie back in the bottle, so I think you have to tread very cautiously when opening up the gateway to it, which I think needs to be opened. We just have to be real careful about how we do it.
I agree.
So you have anything else?
Bill, when you're done. Yeah, just one more.
Yeah.
So our porn resolution declaring pornography as a public health crisis because pornography is fueling human trafficking. It is really messing with our society. There is just such a huge amount of addiction and family breakups. And it's so accessible to everyone, and it's accessible earlier and earlier. Like I said before, the first week in the week one update a couple weeks ago with you, that we have, third graders watching porn on the way to school and filming sex acts on the bus on the way to school and this sort of thing in our community. It's just crazy. So today in the Rules Committee, the resolution came up, and the Rules Committee decides which bills are going to go forward and be able to go on to a committee or to the floor. And it was in the Rules Committee, and no one would bring it up for a motion to allow this to go to the floor for a vote.
Really?
And I was going crazy. Now, the Senate passed it the very first day. You're allowed to do resolutions. Bills take 3 days they have to go through 3 different readings, but a resolution you can pass right off the bat. So the Senate got right to work and did a great job. The House, on the other hand, I just sat there and I looked at every person on that committee and thought, what is going on? And then April Weaver, she finally motioned, yes, I make a motion that we send this to the floor, and no one would second it. And that's killing me because I'm just in this, I just wanted to like yell, you know, what is wrong with you people? And Victor Gaston, he's another Republican, he said, you know what? I would like to read, the resolution is kind of long and they didn't have time to read it. He said, could we please hold this over to next week so we can look at it? And I happen to, so that's the plan. They're going to look it over next week, but for everyone out there.
Yeah, that is stunning to me because it's not even a policy change. It's just a resolution.
It is. It's just to bring awareness to the real problems this is causing in communities and all across our nation. But what I want your people to know is that we need Democrat support as well. This is not a partisan issue. This is affecting everyone. And human trafficking happens to both races, to both parties, to all races. I mean,
it's actually really bad with Hispanics, especially.
Yeah, it's just horrible. So if any of your listeners are out there and they run across one of their representatives in the House or even on the Rules Committee, to encourage them to please vote for this. We need to get this thing passed, and because this will lead to future legislation that will help us get this human trafficking stopped. And this is just the very beginning. And if we can't even do something as simple as this, then how in the world are we going to be able to stop human trafficking? Yeah, because this is the fuel. This is what is propelling human trafficking.
Yeah, and it's absolutely amazing to me, that story, because you didn't bring it up on week 2. So what I assumed happened is it just sailed through the House and it passed. I figured that's what happened.
No. So we will be working very hard this week on getting those committee members, Democrats and Republicans, to understand the issue of why this is so important and why it needs to go forward. And I'm hopeful that it will, next Thursday, it will move out of the Rules Committee and be able to go to the floor. Then we'll have to pressure the Speaker to bring it to the floor because he has all the power and he can say, oh, I think this is going to be too big of a fight. It's going to take 2 hours of debate and we don't want to spend time on this. That's why both Democrats and Republicans need to be talked to ahead of time so that they're all on board and ready to get this thing passed.
Yeah,
that's what your listeners can help with.
That's one of the things that I don't get because as a political observer, there's a lot of issues I can look at and see, okay, well, I don't agree with the Democrat position on this, but I understand where they're coming from. This one, like everything that the Democrats claim to be about when it comes to standing up for the oppressed and speaking out for women's rights, they don't like over-sexualization of women, that kind of thing. I mean, there's nothing that does that more than pornography. And so it just astounds me that it seems like there's not only not bipartisan support, it seems like the Republicans aren't even all that hepped up on this. And I'm just kind of baffled as to why.
Well, and I think in the past when they've tried to pass it, the Democrats were really feeling it was a freedom of the press kind of free speech. It is not. We're talking about obscene porn that is already illegal. We are just talking about bringing attention to the fact that this is illegal and the Justice Department needs to begin enforcing our current obscenity laws. So it's really a no-brainer, Caleb. And I hope next week I'll have better a good report on this.
Yeah, and the main thing to me is even if you want to make the free speech argument, which, again, being a very libertarian-leaning person, I can kind of see where you would come from on that, even if I might have some disagreements. I don't think there is a good argument that this thing should be left as it is to where it's easily accessible to young children. Like, even if you're do whatever you want, that should only kick in once you're 18. But anyway, I see where you're coming from on that. So before I let you go, I know that this isn't about legislation, but I did want to ask your opinion on it because I know that I'm convinced that you have to be following this. You once ran for the District 2 seat for to represent District 2 of Alabama in the United States Congress. And that is a very hotly contested race right now. Do you have any opinions on who you would like to see filling that seat?
Oh, I was hoping you wouldn't ask me that. I really am trying to stay out of this one. Let me tell you the one I really hope that Jeff Coleman does not win this race. And I've looked through the records of $700 million being taken from the government at the expense of, the soldiers moving. I know they're about this lawsuit. And so I would prefer him to not be the one. But here's what I think is going to happen.
Okay.
Most likely, at least from polling that I've seen, if Jeff Coleman doesn't win it outright, I think it will be a runoff between him and Troy King. But
there is not a good option in there.
Yeah. So again, I just really want to stay out of this one. I love Jessica Taylor. I love Terry Hasdorf, the women in the race.
Yeah.
Barry Moore's a nice guy. I like him.
I've talked to Terry. I've talked to Barry Moore. And they'd both, I think, make excellent representatives. But I haven't talked to Jessica Taylor yet. So, and I haven't been able to get in touch with her. I've tried calling her. I've tried emailing. She hasn't returned any of those. If you can get her in here, I'd love to have her for an interview.
Yeah, I would be happy to share your information. And, I would love to see another woman up there. I think it's important, especially fighting against the squad. And both, Terry is a great conservative, and I know her well. She's a friend of mine, and my husband has worked more with Jessica than I have, but I really like Jessica as a person. They do have some establishment ties, but I would love to see a woman up there. So
yeah, right now,
we'll
and you don't have to react to this because I know you're wanting to stay out of it, but people have asked me which direction I'm leaning, and I never decide how I'm going to vote until really like the day before. If I had to vote right now, probably Terry Hasdorf. She very much impressed me when I met her for her interview. And as much as I love Barry Moore, and he actually does have a much more visible record than her, and so that's a point in his favor. Right. I think either one of them would be great, but I really do like Terry Hasdorf. I think she'd make an excellent representative. Yeah,
she's a great lady, and she's a good Christian woman. I really like her. But listen, I will tell you how I am voting on something on March 3rd.
Okay.
We talked about this last week, but Amendment 1, just a reminder to please vote no. It will take away your right to vote for your school board, your state school board member. They are not the reason that we are so low in the ranks for school. It's not because they're just completely dysfunctional, but I don't think the executive branch should have the power. I want a say in who's representing me on the school board. So that's the main reason. Second reason, as we talked about last week, is this will enshrine into our Constitution that we have national standards. We had this verified with the Department of Education as well as the Legislative Services Agency, that right now the only national standards that are recognized is Common Core. So the wording says that if you vote for this, we're going to get rid of Common Core. The truth is, this will enshrine it into we will be mandated to have national standards.
Right. It's a hat trick for sure.
It is. So definitely vote no. I can say without a doubt how I'm voting. For all the others, I kind of just want to keep it a secret, I guess.
Well, that's certainly your prerogative. That's one of the things that our republic is founded on, is the idea that you don't have to tell people how you voted.
Yeah, and we're only a week and a half away about.
I know. I can't believe it snuck up on me like this.
I know. It's crazy. So we'll see how things shape up for next week. It's going to be a really busy week, and so I look forward to checking up on a couple of these things that we talked about, the Montgomery tax. And the other thing from Will Barfoot, what was that?
Right, the charter school on military
Charter school,
bases.
right.
Yeah.
Hopefully I'll have an answer for you next week of what I found.
All right, as always, we're looking forward to it. Thank you so much.
You bet. Have a great night. Bye-bye.
You too. That's Becky Gerritson of Eagle Forum, Alabama. As always, it is a pleasure to have her with us and have her expertise here. A lot to talk about, and we'll get to a lot more of that on next Thursday when she joins us, have some of those questions answered. But for right now, we're going to go ahead and take a break. And as promised in that segment, we're going to talk about something going on in the state of Alabama, because Alabama is absolutely, without a doubt, on the front lines of the abortion debate. And that was really put on display the past week and a half to 2 weeks. So we're going to talk about that in just a minute when we come back.
for a reading from the Social Justice Warrior Bible with Pastor Gregory Post.
Welcome in. I'm Gregory Post, head pastor at the Eternal Living Word Trans-Denominational Community Church and Coffee House in Novato, California. Now it's time for a reading from the SJW Bible. Today's reading will come from Leviticus chapter 10, verses 1 through 10. Now Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, took their respective fire pans, and after putting the fire in them, placed incense on it and offered strange fire before the Lord, which he had not commanded them. And the fire came out of the presence of the Lord, which created a wicked cool light show for them to see, and totally got everyone feeling the Spirit's presence. Then Moses said to Aaron, "It is what the Lord spoke, saying, even though I didn't command you to use this strange fire, I totally understand your need to express yourselves in worship and keep yourselves entertained." So Aaron therefore danced and yelled with joy, knowing that his sons were having a good time at worship. Moses called out to Mishael and Ezaphan, and the son of Aaron's uncle Uzziel, and said to them, "Come forward, carry your relatives away in front of the sanctuary outside of the camp, for they have fainted from being overwhelmed by the power of God's coolness." So they came forward and carried them still in their tunics outside the camp, as Moses had said. Then Moses said to Aaron and his sons Eleazar and Ithamar, "Do not uncover your heads, nor tear your clothes, because God wants us to always be happy, and as long as we're happy, He's happy. Therefore, if worship doesn't give you an overwhelming sense of euphoria, you need to find another congregation, preferably one with a more dynamic pastor and band." So they did according to the word of Moses. And the Lord spoke to Aaron, saying, "Do not drink wine or strong drink, neither you nor your sons with you, when you come into the sanctuary, so that you will be able to drink more once you arrive. It is a perpetual statute throughout your generations. And so as to make a distinction between the holy and the profane, between the unclean and the clean, because when worship stops being fun or feels judgy, then it becomes profane and unclean." Wow, so inspiring. This has been a reading from the SJW Bible. And remember, the only truth that matters is your truth. And welcome back, everybody. We appreciate you being with us here on Tactics. And as promised, we are going to go ahead and talk about something that is instrumental to the state of Alabama, something that is going on right now with abortion, because it's interesting how there's a lot of things you could talk about when it comes to Alabama, but it seems as though somehow, for whatever reason, it always just happens to work out this way, that Alabama is always on the forefront. It is one of the front lines of every great civil rights dispute. Sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse, but somehow Alabama is always involved. We were the first ones to be involved, or one of the very first ones to be involved with the Civil War, for example. We were one of the very first states to secede. The original capital was here in Montgomery, and that, of course, was about ending slavery. When it came to the civil rights dispute, there were the Montgomery bus boycotts, there was the marches in Selma and Birmingham, and so those are a couple of examples of how it's, something that we can take pride in, that we wound up overcoming that, but the reason that it happened here is because it was really bad here. This is kind of oddly enough the opposite, and I'm glad that Alabama is, I think, going to be looked back upon through historical eyes as being one of the champions of the great civil rights debate of our time, which of course is abortion. The fighting for the rights for the unborn to live. And there's several different stories that we're going to go through that kind of put on display why Alabama is really at the epicenter of this entire thing. So, first of all, Alabama Representative Jenny Schaefer proposed a Born Alive bill. Now, technically, you could even argue that this isn't about abortion. To a degree, it's not. But we'll get into the relevancy here in a second. You may have heard that I was talking about this with Becky just a few minutes ago, and we kind of, talked about it, skimmed over it a little bit, just about the status and whether or not it was going to pass or not. So for those of you who don't know what exactly this does, the bill by Representative Schaefer, if a baby shows a sign of life, in other words, his little limbs are moving, or the baby coughs or breathes or makes some kind of noise or whatever, if there's a sign of life in a baby after an abortion has taken place. So not connected to the mother, not in the womb. We're talking about a baby that was inside the mother and now is outside the mother, not even with the umbilical cord connected. If a botched abortion takes place and somehow the baby survives, and by the way, there are cases of this happening. There are children that survive abortions, and some of them wind up growing up and being able to lead full, fulfilling lives and lead a completely normal, healthy life. And unfortunately, there are also probably cases that, I don't think that there's a whole lot of cases that you can look back and look directly at this, but that's because it doesn't go reported and because there's no laws to protect children in this situation, that after a birth take place, that the doctor would execute it, because the whole point of an abortion is to kill the baby. And if you have failed in killing the baby, well, then the abortion has been botched, which, by the way, it is a fascinating thing to think about, that the only time an abortion can fail, the only time an abortion can mess up or something goes wrong in an abortion does not take place, is when the baby survives. Every single successful abortion ends in a death. And for people on the left to suggest that the baby is not alive is logically inconsistent, because, well, how would it survive an abortion if it wasn't alive to begin with? How would a child even survive? Because to survive, you have to be alive in the first place. A dead person can't survive an event because they're not alive to be able to continue on living. And so even the terminology logically doesn't pan out when you apply this logic, when you talk about this. And so the Born Alive bill, you would think, to a Democrat, would be common sense, that because they are saying that the life is somehow conferred upon a person when they make the short journey 8 inches up the birth canal, which granted makes no sense, but that is their argument, that once it goes through the birth canal, then it's a baby. And they constantly accuse people on the pro-life side of saying, oh, you're only pro-fetus, you're not pro-baby, because once the baby comes here, you don't care about it, which is absurd on a number of levels. The vast majority of children's hospitals and the vast majority of adoption agencies have a religious tie to it. There are specific religious organizations devoted to helping women that are considering abortion instead choose adoption. So there's a myriad of reasons why that's a bogus talking point. But even if you were to accept it, you would think that this would be a bill that would have bipartisan support, that both sides could look at, and the Democrats are looking at it as like, well, yeah, we're in favor of that, because once the baby's born, yeah, we're all about the baby. We're very pro-baby then. But they're not. The Democrats in the state of Alabama are opposing this, and there has been similar legislation proposed all over the country that says something similar. And the only other talking point that I have heard to try to counter this and say why Democrats would be against it is that they will say, well, because it's not really happening. Well, if it's not happening, then it should be real easy for you to sign it, right? Because there are botched abortions. We know that that's taking place. And we know that there are people that are here today that are survivors of botched abortion. So we know that botched abortions are taking place. Their argument is, well, yeah, but if that happens, then common sense would take over, and the doctor would, of course, take care of the child and provide it with medical care. Okay, well, if that's the case, then I don't see why you would be opposed to this bill in the first place, because let's just say there's, 10,000 abortion doctors in the United States, and 9,999 of them would never do something like that. This bill is to protect maybe the one that doesn't do that. You're telling me there's not even a chance, not even a possibility that somebody in this predicament would do this, and we're just going to rely on them and say that there's absolutely nothing wrong. We're not going to provide a protection just in case for that child if it survives an abortion. Well, if that's the case, if that's your argument, then you should be in favor of the bill too, because it's just a precautionary measure in case somebody were to do that. Instead of it being a murky area, it makes it crystal clear that under the law, these children would be able to survive. And this is especially relevant when you are looking at one side of the Democrat Party that defended a guy, Governor Ralph Northam, that was saying, yeah, what would happen if there's a botched abortion is that we'll keep the child comfortable, and while it's over there sleeping in the other room, then a conversation would ensue about what we're going to do with the child. Yeah, well, this would end that conversation because the child would be protected. And so there are at least some people out there, Ralph Northam being one of them, that is saying that, yeah, after the child is born, well, then we might still have to talk about whether or not you would still want that baby in a botched abortion. And so we know for a fact there are at least some people that believe that that should be something that you can consider just killing that child. So why wouldn't we want to have these laws in place to protect them? Because ultimately, anything that even remotely accepts the death-worshipping cult that is the abortion lobby and Planned Parenthood, the Democrats will not touch. That's what it really does boil down to. And so with this, there are people, unfortunately, Democrats in the House and the Senate, that strongly oppose this because they don't want to be seen as anti-abortion, which again doesn't make sense because we're not even talking about abortion at this point. This is post-birth. This would be infanticide. And so this was met with unanimous opposition by the Democrats. Not a single Alabama Democrat voted in favor of it. It is absolutely disgusting. And I think the reason that it bothers them so much, and one of the reasons that they really don't want to support it, is because it uses the Democrats' own flawed logic against them. Their argument for why abortion should be legal doesn't work in this scenario. Because if you're admitting that a child that is aborted, for example, at 4 or 5 months into the pregnancy and somehow survives, well, that's a pretty good indication that you shouldn't be killing these children. That's a pretty good indication that these children, even if you're a pro-abortion person, is viable and can sustain themselves even outside the womb. I mean, yeah, it's going to be an uphill battle, just like a preemie. But the point is, if that can take place, it throws a monkey wrench into their absurd, idiotic argument that somehow this is not a human being. And that is why, ultimately, they don't want to support it. They don't want to see it. They don't want to touch it. They don't want to think about it. Because ultimately, if they admit that these children need protection, they are admitting that a person's life is more than just whether or not the woman wants it or not. That there is an intrinsic value in these children, and if they admit that, they understand that their argument for why abortion should remain legal falls apart. And with both this and other bills that regard abortion, most famously or notoriously, depending on which side of the aisle you're standing on, is, of course, Alabama's abortion bill. And in response to this, Democrats have become the crazy person that sets themselves on fire as some kind of, I don't know, show of solidarity with somebody. This has been the approach that they have taken, that they've just decided to go full-on crazy, barking at the moon kind of tactics to be able to try to counter this, because they can't make the logical debate. So what they have to do is they have to do crazy antics to try to get attention. They know that they can't win this thing on an actual reasoned discussion. So what they have to do is they have to resort to the crazy tactics. And this is really put forward by Representative Rolanda Hollis. She's the one that is doing this. You may also remember that we talked about this with Becky, I want to say 2, maybe 3 weeks ago, but neither one of us could figure out why they were proposing this, because surely it was some kind of like prank or something like that. Well, turns out that's exactly what it was. It was the Democrats trying to make a statement. They know it's not going to pass, but trying to make a statement on abortion and failing miserably at it. So Representative Hollis proposed a vasectomy bill as a response to the abortion ban, and openly admits that that's the reason that she is doing this. And what this bill would do is mandate that all men have a vasectomy at the age of 50 or after their third child. So if you're a man, if you either have 3 children, after child number 3, you're legally required to have a vasectomy. Or if you attain the age of 50, whether you have 2 kids or no kids, whichever one comes first, 3 kids or 50, then you have to have a vasectomy. And so this is obviously a prank. It's ridiculous. It's never going to pass. And that's not the point. They're trying to make some kind of statement about abortion. And Hollis talks about this in an interview with AL.com, where she says, "It always takes 2 to tango. We can't put all that responsibility on women. Men need to be responsible also." Man, when you look at statements like this by the Democrats, when you see just the utter ignorance and sheer evil and bigotry, where does she get off suggesting that it takes both a man and a woman to create a baby? Don't you know that 2 women can get married and have kids by themselves, and 2 men can get married? Now, granted, it still takes a person with a penis and a womb. Like, those are 2 ingredients that you still pretty much have to have, because there has to be sperm at some point, and there has to be, but, you know, just because you're pregnant doesn't mean you're not a man, and just because you have sperm doesn't mean you're not a woman. Man, these Democrats, they're just so ignorant and backwards. It really does show that whenever they're trying to make a statement and failing miserably at it, they can't even get out of their own way. Because any of the trans community would look at something like this and just their mind would explode. Like, you can't say that you need a man and a woman to have a baby. You can't even. That's what's so hilarious about the whole trans thing. And this was really put on display at some kind of, I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was some kind of like Democrat conference that they had where they had to stand up, and before they were allowed to say anything, they had to give their preferred pronouns, and they had to ask permission to say certain things. Or this is what's so hilarious about this, is free speech cannot exist like this, where every 10 seconds somebody has to stop and apologize for saying something offensive. You literally can't have a normal conversation with somebody because of all the microaggressions you might be throwing out there. Hollis kind of being an example of this. But this being, let's snap back to reality here, where it does take a man and a woman to have a baby. Hollis is actually correct in that assessment, and that's about where the correctness of her statement ends. So she's saying because women are now required to not have abortions in the state of Alabama, at least that's the law in the books, you're not allowed to have an abortion, that we need to give men vasectomies. So it's a really, really odd, there's really no logical train of thought undergirding this. It's just a crazy thing that they did to try to make some kind of statement. This is clearly somebody that has run out of ideas. Like, she wanted to do something to show her solidarity with the abortion movement, but she couldn't come up with anything. So she's just like, I'll throw out the first crazy idea that pops into my head, and apparently this was it. Because first of all, she's doing this routine where it's like she doesn't understand what the pro-life argument is. Anybody that has studied the abortion debate for more than 10 consecutive seconds understands that the opposition to abortion based on the pro-life position on this is that the child is alive. It's a person. And so because of that, that is the reason that you're not allowed to kill the child. I've never heard anybody at any point, religious, non-religious, Democrat, Republican, conservative, liberal, whatever, I've never heard anybody make the case that a sperm is a person. And I've gone to a lot of pro-life events. I have a lot of friends in a lot of different religious communities, a lot of frat brothers with a lot of varying beliefs on stuff like that. Never once heard anybody ever even attempt to make that argument. Pro-life, pro-abortion, whatever, no matter which one they were, nobody has ever tried to make that argument to me. And by that same token, I don't know of literally anybody that opposes legal birth control. And I'm friends with a lot of Catholics. And yet they oppose it on moral grounds. They think it's an immoral thing to do. But I don't know a single one that is saying, yep, we should get rid of birth control. It should be not even an option. Because even though they may oppose it morally, as long as we're talking about the one that actually keeps fertilization from happening, then there is no life that is being ended there. And so they try to play this game as like, we don't understand what the pro-life argument is. We're going to assume that they think that anything that might potentially result in a baby, preventing that in any way is something that would be legally banned. Well, no, we're opposed to ending a pregnancy after it starts. Once it starts, it becomes a problem. And since there is, regardless of what Democrats will tell you, there is no such thing as a man that can get pregnant, then of course men would not fall into the abortion. You can't ban a man from having an abortion because it's not possible for a man to have an abortion. A man can definitely die in an abortion, and, about 25 million American male babies have, and the other 25 million would be females. But the point is, as far as like a man going to get an abortion, that's not a thing, which is the reason that they're trying to come up with something that would be the equivalent of this. But the funny thing is, there's absolutely no equivalency at all because a sperm is not a person. And another thing that's also really weird, well, there's still no equivalency there, even if a sperm were, a person, or that a man could get pregnant. Even if that were the case, there's still not an equivalency there, because what an abortion does is end a pregnancy and prevent a life from being born. What you're proposing, a vasectomy, would do the exact opposite. And so if there were a parallel between a man having a vasectomy, some kind of male form of a forced birth, because that's one of the things they try to use now. They call the pro-life side the forced birth movement, which I'm not in favor of forcing anyone to get pregnant. I am in favor of protecting that life that is created once a woman is pregnant. That's the difference. But if there were an equivalency to the forced birth movement for men, wouldn't that punishment be having a lot of sex? Which is, granted, not much of a punishment for men, but you see what I'm saying? That would be the equivalent. It wouldn't be a vasectomy, it would be the opposite. It would be men being forced to procreate and to have a lot of sex with a lot of women. Like, that would be the natural reverse of that if you were trying to create an equivalent thing to an abortion ban. So, again, there's no logic being applied here. It's just she came up with something, and it's kind of like the crazy person on the street that they're opposed to something. They may not be 100% sure why, but they know that they're opposed to something, and so the crazy person at the protest, they douse themselves with gasoline and light themselves on fire. Like, they don't understand that they're not really making a statement. In their mind, I'm sure they believe that it's something that is incredibly bold and brave and something that's admirable. But to the people walking by, they're just like, okay, that's a crazy person. I don't want to associate with them. That's what the Democrats have become when it comes to abortion. And to kind of put a cherry on this whole thing, to look at how far the Democrats have fallen, Doug Jones, who has already once voted against the Pain Capable Act. And for those of you that are unfamiliar with the legislation of the Pain Capable Act, it's legislation that is designed to protect children on a federal level after 20 weeks. So when it comes to this, after 20 weeks, because we know for a fact the science is already clear on this, the nervous system is developed enough to where the babies living inside the womb can feel pain after 5 months. I think I said 5 weeks. I meant five months. Sorry. I want to clarify that. After 5 months, the neurological system is sophisticated enough to feel pain. And so because of that, that's the measure that they want to use now at the federal level to ban it for any child that can feel pain. Now, there is some debate as to whether or not a child can feel pain before that, and that's because it's very hard to scan the brain or the nervous system before then, because you're basically having to X-ray two or MRI two people at that point. So it's very difficult to tell if they can feel pain before that. But we know for a fact there is proof that they can feel it from 5 months and beyond. And so this bill would specifically deal with this. Doug Jones has already voted against it once. A different version of it has come up again. And a reporter asked him a simple question: do you believe that abortion after 5 months should be banned? And I want you to see his reaction to that question.
Senator, how are you? Do you think abortion should be banned after 5 months?
What stupid question have you got from me?
Do you think abortion should be banned after 5 months?
Sir, should abortion be banned? As I said, what a stupid...
You're voting on it next week, sir.
Yeah, and I'll vote on it next week. That's just like I did the last week.
All right, so Senator Doug Jones. Look, they don't call him Abortion Jones for nothing. Senator Jones gets, this reporter, I guess, walks up to him and asks a very simple question. Would you ban abortion after 5 months? Do you think abortion should be banned after 5 months? Now, I want you to think about this. Jones is so pro-abortion. He is so hardcore in favor of abortion on demand, anytime, anywhere, for any reason, that he thinks it's laughable that anybody would suggest that there be any limits on abortion. The truth is, Jones does get something right in that particular exchange. It is a stupid question. And the journalist, I mean, he probably knew what response he was going to get. But it is a stupid question because, as my dad said, who was a teacher for a long time and got asked a lot of stupid questions, the only stupid question is the one that you should already know the answer to. And so Jones is 100% right. That is a dumb question. And it is a dumb question because Jones is a radical when it comes to abortion, and so we all knew that he was going to vote for it anyway. But I want you to think about this because he not only thinks it's a stupid question, he's laughing at it. To him, it is hysterical that anybody would even suggest that he might consider putting some limit on abortion at the federal level. And to put this into perspective, right now, currently, according to the most recent poll that was done on this, only 13% of Americans actually believe that late-term abortions done in the third trimester, which would be banned under this proposal, should take place. So Doug Jones is in the extreme minority on this. Only 13% of Americans agree with Doug Jones' position on this. And America is one of only 6 countries in the entire world that has no restrictions on abortion at the federal level. None. Up until the point of birth, an abortion can take place at any point in that window. Only 6 other nations in the world are that radical. And by the way, some of the ones that allow abortion up to that point are China and North Korea. We're not exactly in great company there. But somehow we're supposed to believe that Doug Jones is a moderate. That, oh no, he's a blue dog Democrat. He's not some crazy leftist. He's not uber left. He's not somebody that just toes the line with Chuck Schumer. No, he's a moderate. No, I'd call that pretty dang radical. That 87% of Americans disagree with your abortion stance, and that only 6 other countries in the entire world have the same stance on abortion that you do. That, by definition, is pretty radical. You're in the extreme minority on that. And Doug Jones is so set on that he thinks it's funny that anybody would even suggest that he is not. That's who Doug Jones is. So whenever one of your Democrat friends or neighbors tries to tell you, hey, Doug Jones, no, he's a moderate, he's a blue dog, he's not one of these crazy radicals, he's not an AOC or something like that. Well, I don't know if he is on abortion or on economic policy or some other things, even though his voting record is really pretty abysmal when it comes to stuff like that. But on abortion, he's one of the most radical people in the country. There are very few people that are as pro-abortion as Doug Jones. Keep that in mind when it comes time to vote. But the thing is, this isn't something that we know is limited to Alabama. Alabama is definitely one of the front lines of it, and it's definitely something that is important to Alabamians, but we all know this is not something that is limited to the state of Alabama. In fact, this is something that's been going on for a while, and to show that Alabama is not the only place where Democrats are this wildly radical on this issue of abortion and defending life, Chris Cuomo, CNN, who is in a competition to be the dumber of the Cuomo brothers, and right now is doing a pretty good job, I have to admit. He says that it is actually a lie to claim that Democrats are radical on abortion. Now, you just heard everything that I laid out in response to Doug Jones, yet here we have Chris Cuomo saying that, oh, it's actually a lie to say the Democrats are radical when it comes to this stuff. Here he is.
And so if you're a Christian, if you're a conservative who believes in those values, and your choices are Donald Trump, who sometimes says things you don't like and you wouldn't do it that way, versus rule by a party that would allow abortion on demand and install federal judges who would allow it, this is no choice at all. You go with your gut on policy.
But you know that's a
and you go
lie,
with your
right?
faith and your morals on policy. It's not a lie.
Right,
Watch
so you're
going to
be about
he got
faith and
asked
morals,
directly this
and
morning,
then you're going to
and he
lie. I
said-
saw
he
the
said
clip
the-
to
he
prepare
said
for the
every
segment,
abortion-
Scott. He did not say abortion
I'm sorry?
on demand whenever you want it, wherever you want it. Let me ask you something. How do you reconcile?
He did.
How do you? This is why I just
am
wanted
not
you and
lying
me.
to you, Chris
He
Cuomo.
didn't, Scott, and we both know it. And look, no, I'm not saying. Look, it's a lie to say that Pete Buttigieg or anybody in the Democratic Party who's running for president wants to have abortion whenever you want it at any time.
All right, so Chris Cuomo there. First of all, there's a couple of really interesting things in that clip because he is one of the things that they talked about was an interview that was done by Pete Buttigieg where he's talking to Meghan McCain on The View, and he said that he would not put any restrictions on abortion, and so Chris Cuomo takes issue with Scott Jennings, the guest there, saying that Pete Buttigieg was calling for abortion on demand. So a couple of things that I want you to notice about that. First of all, this is not Caleb Colquitt's words. These are Chris Cuomo's words, who is saying that suggesting that Democrats are in favor of abortion on demand is untrue, and also that it would constitute extreme, because he's saying to Scott Jennings, you're wanting to cast them as extremists. You're trying to make them out to be scary when it comes to abortion, and because of that, you're trying to say they're in favor of abortion on demand. So that's Chris Cuomo. Chris Cuomo of CNN, not exactly a right-leaning guy, saying that, well, abortion on demand is extreme, and you're trying to cast them as extremists, ergo you're saying they're for abortion on demand. And, by the way, Chris Cuomo is right. Like I said, a recent Gallup poll found that only 13% of Americans are in favor of no restrictions on abortions in the third trimester, that kind of thing. And we are one of only 7 nations on Earth that still has abortion on demand at the federal level, that there are no time restrictions when it comes to abortion. But here's what's really at the heart of the matter. Was Scott Jennings lying? Was it accurate? Because that's what Chris Cuomo said. He said that, no, Pete Buttigieg nor anybody in the Democrat Party is in favor of abortion on demand. Except we have the clip of that, and I'll let you watch and make your own decision on this, whether or not he was lying. Listen to this clip.
Just got a lot of play in conservative media, conservative circles, where you were talking about, and this is your quote, there's a lot of parts of the Bible that talk about how life begins with breath. So even that is something we can interpret differently. It obviously, in my circles, was passed around everywhere because I think the interpretation from pro-life people like me was that you meant a baby actually being born, and then possible, there's a lot of controversy with Governor Northam and what it means and what time a woman should be able to have an abortion. I just wanted you to clarify because I found that statement to be pretty radical.
Well, I'm just pointing to the fact that different people will interpret their own moral lights, and for that matter, interpret Scripture differently. But we live in a country where it is extremely important that no one person have to be subjected to some other person's interpretation of their own religion. I know we're not going to agree.
Partial birth abortion is something that was coming up in, like I said, Governor Northam. It was a huge controversy when he was running for governor. I think people, even Democrats, and there are a lot of pro-life Democrats in the country, want to know exactly where your line is, because you will be the president if you win.
Right, but my point is that it shouldn't be up to a government official to draw the line. It should be up to the woman who is confronted with the choice.
Invoke infanticide after a baby was born, you'd be comfortable.
Does anybody
with that.
seriously think that's what these cases are about?
Think
about the situation.
That, yes.
If this is a late-term situation, then by definition, it's one where a woman was expecting to carry the pregnancy to term. Then she gets the most, perhaps, devastating news of her life. We're talking about families that may have picked out a name, maybe assembling a crib, and they learn something excruciating and are faced with this terrible choice. And I don't know what to tell them morally about what they should do. I just know that I trust her, and her decision, medically or morally, isn't going to be any better because the government is commanding her to do it in a certain way.
I respect that. Just to put a peg on this, I respect down from it, this is going to hurt you in the middle of the country with the Republicans you're trying to win over. People like me, this is a hard line, and quite frankly, that answer is just it's just as radical as I thought it was.
What's important to understand about this, and I know that was a long clip, but I felt it was important to do that to get the full context of not just his answer and take him out of context, but I wanted you to get the context of what Meghan McCain was asking about. So she point blank asked him a question: would a President Pete Buttigieg be in favor of any limitations on abortion? And she specifically asked about late-term abortions. And his answer is no restrictions whatsoever. How is that not saying he's in favor of abortion on demand? He said, I don't think the government should get involved at all. There should be no restrictions on that. Well, is there any other way to understand that answer other than abortion on demand? Because I don't think there is. Now, maybe Chris Cuomo has a different translator, or he thinks abortion on demand means something completely different. I don't know, but either way, I don't see how any rational person can see Meghan McCain ask, would you be in favor of any limits on late-term abortion? And he goes, no restrictions. The government shouldn't get involved. How is that not saying he's in favor of abortion on demand? And he can sit there and call Scott Jennings a liar all he wants, but that doesn't make it the case. I mean, you saw that clip just like I did. That's exactly what Pete Buttigieg was saying. And this, what's so crazy about that is not only does he stop there, because it would be one thing if she asked, would you be in favor of late-term abortions? Would you be in favor of anything that restricts that? And he says, no, I don't think the government should get involved. But that's not all he said. First, he says that he wouldn't, and then he goes on to expound upon that and explain why he believes that late-term abortions should be allowed. So it's not even something that's kind of murky, or maybe he said it, maybe he didn't, maybe that's not what he really meant. No, he then makes the case for why they should remain legal. And so I don't know if Chris Cuomo just wasn't watching the same clip as I was, but to suggest that nobody in the Democrat Party, Pete Buttigieg nor any other Democrat, is making this case is patently false. The Democrats have unanimously voted against any kind of bill that places a restriction because, like I said, we've already voted on this once in the Senate, the Pain Capable Protection Act, that they would not restrict abortion even in the late terms, even though only 13% of Americans think that that should be the way that abortion is in this country. They still refuse to do even that. And the answer itself is not only morally reprehensive and absolutely wrong, it goes even a step further than that. Because as wrong as that answer is, and as evil as it is to want to kill a child in the womb, especially one that can already feel pain, has already basically fully developed with the exception of it just needs to grow a little bit more in size, as horrible as that is, it's also not based in reality. Because you'll listen that his explanation was, well, these are women that have no choice. They're put in a very difficult medical situation and they have to choose between having a baby and staying alive. And in many cases, these are women that have already picked out a name. They've already picked out a crib. They want the baby. They know that it's going to be too medically difficult for them to have it. Well, first of all, those particular situations are insanely rare. They're insanely rare. And most of the time, the actual medically preferable thing to do is to induce labor, get the baby out of the mom if it is some kind of medical emergency. Because performing an abortion would actually take longer and be more dangerous to the woman's health in most of the situations that he's talking about where it's some kind of medical reason, it's some kind of medical rationale. But here's the thing. It's all a game. Because this is what I would have done if I were in Meghan McCain's shoes at that point, and I'm sure I would look terrible in her shoes. But the point is, if I were there, that I would ask, okay, well, does that mean that you would be in favor of a ban on late-term abortions that do not involve some kind of medical emergency? Because even in the state of Alabama, right here in the heart of Dixie, where we have an actual full-on ban at any point for any reason on abortion, there is still a medical exception. If you can prove that your life is in danger or your health is in significant danger, You actually, even under Alabama's abortion law, can still pursue an abortion. That is still a thing that is medically allowable under our system. Now, there's a couple of situations where I actually disagree with that, and we had that debate back then. If you want to watch and hear my opinions on it, go back to an episode where we were talking about it. But my point in all of this is, even the extreme pro-life people like myself can still at least see an argument for a medical exception being made in some circumstances. May not agree with it morally, but can see why there is at least a legal argument if the legal argument is to preserve life. But Buttigieg is saying, because there are some situations where that might happen, we should just have it legal for everybody. Well, no, you're playing the game. It's the same thing when you talk about the rape and incest exception. If you ever do get into a debate with somebody that is pro-choice, and they bring up the rape and incest exception, the first thing that you should do is, okay, well, are you in favor of getting rid of all elective abortions then? And about 95% of the time they'll say no. See, what they're trying to do is they're trying to take an exception, an extreme minority of cases, and use it to justify all the cases where it's done for any reason. I mean, literally just because I'm using it as a birth control and I wasn't responsible with the birth control, so now I want to get rid of the baby because I don't want to have a baby. See, they're using those examples to try to justify the whole thing. Now, I think that it's absolutely wrong to kill a child for something his father did, even if it was something horribly violent like rape. But at the same time, I would still say that if there's a Democrat out there that believes that that should be the exception, and they want to make a bill that would ban all abortions except for that, okay, I'll sign on for it. It's better than the system we have now. I still think we need to go further in that. But the point is, I'm going to be on their side if they bring that up. What is done here is they are trying to take an exception and make it the rule. And so that's really what you're running into. Sorry about that. That they're trying to take one of these extremely rare cases and blow it way out of proportion. Because when you're talking about a medical emergency like that, it's actually pretty rare anyway. The Guttmuncher Institute, which, by the way, they say that there were about 12,000 late-term abortions every year. And by the way, I want you to remember that Guttmuncher is actually a pro-abortion lobby group. So they're not exactly conservatives. This isn't coming from the March for Life or the National Right to Life. This is coming from a pro-abortion group. And they actually say that in these cases, most of the late-term abortions have nothing to do with medical necessity. So this is from Guttmuncher, and this is a report that they did. And I want you to read the last line there because they're talking about it. But data suggests that most women seeking later terminations are not doing so for reasons of fetal abnormality or life endangerment. So I guess the only thing to say there is Pete Buttigieg gets it completely wrong. Even the pro-abortion people are saying, no, late-term abortions, most of the time, they're not doing it because of a medical reason, they're doing it for convenience. He's trying to use that he's trying to play on your emotions and go to that extremely small minority of women that are in the situation that he's talking about and suggesting that that ought to be the standard and we should use that to justify all abortions. It's incredibly dishonest. And in their study of an 80% sample, they found that they, quote, raising children alone, these are the situations that the women found themselves in, that they were, quote, raising children alone, were depressed or using illicit substances, were in conflict with a male partner, or experiencing domestic violence, and had trouble deciding on, and then had access problems, or were young and had never given birth. So according to Guttmuncher, these are the reasons that women are getting late-term abortions. Now, several of these situations are horrible, and I have profound sympathy for somebody in this situation. None of it is a justification for killing your kid. Like, there's a lot of women that have toddlers that are in these exact same situations, and I feel for them. But that's not an excuse to kill your 2-year-old. And it's also not what Pete Buttigieg is talking about, where they do want the baby. And so he's being completely dishonest here. Now, maybe this is just one instance where Cuomo was wrong. So he was wrong on the Pete Buttigieg thing and being radical and being in favor of abortion on demand. But he was right on the vast majority of Democrats, at least, not being this radical. But unfortunately, that's not true either. And if you don't believe me, you need look no further than just a couple weeks ago. Not this most recent debate, but the one before it. Here's an exchange between the debate moderators and Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders.
Lived in an America in which abortion was illegal, and rich women still got abortions. And that's what we have to remember about this. States are heading toward trying to ban abortion outright, and the Supreme Court seems headed in exactly that direction as well. If we are going to protect the people of the United States of America, and we are going to protect our rights to have dominion over our own bodies, then it's going to mean we can't simply rely on the courts. 3 out of every 4 people in America believe right now that the rule of Roe versus Wade should be the law. That means we should be pushing for a congressional solution as well. It is time to have a national law to protect the right of a woman's choice.
You asked a simple question. Is there a litmus test for those of us up here? For me, there is. I will never nominate any person to the Supreme Court or the federal courts in general who is not 100% pro Roe v. Wade. Number 2, we have got to codify Roe v. Wade into legislation. Number 3, we have to significantly expand funding for Planned Parenthood.
So there you have it, right out of the horse's mouth. Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders saying, no, I wouldn't appoint a single judge that isn't 100% Roe v. Wade. And not only that, we need to take it a step further. We need to make Roe v. Wade the law of the land. We need to codify that in legislation. Now, I want to point out a couple of things here. First of all, Roe v. Wade is no longer the standard. And actually hasn't been for a long time. I don't remember the exact timeline. But if I didn't mention this, then Laura Clark would come through my computer screen and slap me for not getting this right. So I'm going to do the best that I can here. On this particular note, Roe v. Wade actually hasn't been the standard for a very long time. The newest standard is the viability standard. And because of that, states are allowed to restrict abortion up to the point of viability, which, by the way, is a moving target as science gets more sophisticated and better, and preemies are able to live at earlier and earlier stages in development. But I'm not going to get off into all the details on that. Suffice it to say that the Roe v. Wade standard, which had no restrictions on it whatsoever, that's actually been gone for a really long time. And to codify Roe v. Wade into legislation, what they are basically suggesting there on stage is abortion on demand, and that's a federal law, and no state can restrict it. That's what they were just advocating for. So to say that no Democrat is suggesting abortion on demand anywhere, anytime, for any reason, that's exactly what Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, 2 of the Democrat frontrunners, just said on stage. And by the way, I could have, but this segment's already running really long anyway. There were several clips from other candidates. I remember one specifically from Amy Klobuchar that didn't right out say it, but basically suggested it. We already showed you one where Pete Buttigieg was talking about it. Joe Biden said essentially the same thing. I mean, to suggest that, as Chris Cuomo did, that it's a lie to say that Democrats are radical on abortion. No, the Democrats, at least the ones at the top that are running for office, they're in the extreme minority when it comes to this. Very few Americans, including a lot of pro-choice Americans, disagree with their stance on when abortion should be restricted. And yet Chris Cuomo continues to peddle this thing that, oh, well, you're just fear-mongering and you're just making stuff up, and nobody in the Democrat Party is really all that radical when it comes to abortion. And let's not all forget about their funding of Planned Parenthood, because I find that pretty dang radical. That you're in favor of funding abortion with taxpayer dollars, and all of them have talked about increasing funding to Planned Parenthood and increasing spending on it. Now, Lord knows that when it comes to something like the NRA, that they're a group that I support, and I like them, but they're not funded by taxpayer dollars, nor should they ever be. And Planned Parenthood is exactly the same way. There is no reason, whether you're pro-choice as the day is long, if you're one of those 13% that's uber radical and thinks abortion on demand anytime for any reason should be the standard, there is no reason to suggest that taxpayer money should also be going to Planned Parenthood, even if you believe that. That people should be funding something that in their mind is murder, and that you should still be taking their taxpayer money and spending it on something like that. But that's the stance of a lot of, that is the continued stance, the stated position of every single Democrat that was on stage that night. That they would continue to use taxpayer money to fund Planned Parenthood. And unfortunately, it's the stance of an awful lot of Republicans as well. And to illustrate my point on this, Andrew Yang was arguably the only one that would even talk unfavorably about abortion and was lambasted for it. Here's Andrew Yang.
I think we have to get back to the point where no one is suggesting that we be celebrating an abortion at any point in the pregnancy. That there was a time in Democratic circles where we used to talk about it being something that like you don't like to see, but that should be within the freedoms of the woman and the mother to decide. And so to me, I think there is a really important tone to set on this, where you don't just say, like, we're absolutist about it, though I have to say I am relatively absolutist on this. Like, I think that it should be completely up to the woman and her doctor, and the state should not be intervening all the way through pregnancy. But it's a tragedy to me if someone decides that they don't want to have a child and they're on the fence, and that maybe at some point later, I mean, it's a very, very difficult personal decision. And it should be something that we're very, very sensitive to. I think that celebrating children, family, like these are universal human values. And if we manage to lead on that and then say, but we also stand for women's reproductive rights, I believe we can bring Americans closer together on a really, really important personal issue.
Now, I want you to think about this, because Andrew Yang wound up getting out of the race about 72 hours after that, and I don't think that it was exclusively because of these comments, but I think they played a contributing factor, because people on the left, the claws and fangs came out and they were going after him. There were people that were saying he needs to drop out immediately. There is no room for anybody running for the Democratic presidential nomination that espouses these beliefs. And I want you to think about the seriousness of this. And I'm not just talking about randos on Twitter. These were big players, journalists, people in think tanks, so on and so forth. What did he say there? Because he was in favor of abortion on demand. He said in that exchange between him and the interviewer, he said, I don't think that it should ever be restricted. I think abortion on demand at any point in the pregnancy. But I also think that we should change the tone a little bit. Apparently, anything less than full-on celebration and talking about how wonderful abortion is enough to get you kicked off the island in the Democrat Party. That if you're not willing to go out there with a party hat on talking about how awesome abortion is, then you're just too pro-life for us. The guy said abortion on demand at any point in the pregnancy. That wasn't far enough radical for the people in the DNC. But yet, somehow, Chris Cuomo still believes. So I'm saying that the Democrats are for abortion on demand, that's ridiculous. And another thing that was really funny, too, and you could watch all this unfold on Twitter live as it was happening. The funny thing that happened to Andrew Yang is that there were two camps that immediately formed after Yang said this. There were the people that said, oh, that's ridiculous. He's borrowing a Republican talking point. He's fallen for a Republican talking point that isn't true. There's nobody that actually celebrates abortion. There's nobody that's actually giddy about abortion and wants to talk about it and thinks about it as a morally good thing. And then directly underneath that person that was tweeting would be somebody else that says, no, we should celebrate our abortion. And I mean, it was amazing to watch that the people were claiming nobody celebrates abortion as people were replying to the thread celebrating abortion. And the idea that nobody celebrates abortion, I mean, is just absolute nonsense. You remember Cecile Richards, the former CEO of Planned Parenthood, started the hashtag Shout Your Abortion, where they said women should not feel ashamed about it and should be proud of it, and we want you to tell your stories about it. Lena Dunham actually said on one of her podcasts, I haven't had an abortion, but I wish that I had. I want that experience. You have Michelle Williams in her Golden Globe speech about a month ago, who was talking about the reason that she's successful and the reason she was able to win a Golden Globe is because that she got an abortion, and that's the reason that she's been as successful as she has, and that ought to be something that is celebrated. Michelle Wolf doing a literal Netflix special where she came out in a costume dressed like a slutty female version of Uncle Sam with fireworks and sparklers saying, "Yay, abortion, God bless the United States and God bless abortion." If that's not celebration, I have no freaking idea what is. And so this idea that, oh, no one actually celebrates abortion. Yeah, Yang was right. And his position on abortion is, of course, wrong, but Yang was right. There are people that do celebrate it. And people in the Democrat Party are completely turning a blind eye on that. Also, remember, in all of this, because we've just given you a myriad of example after example after example of how every single Democrat at the top is for abortion on demand and talks about it, and even there are some that actually celebrate that. And Chris Cuomo still claiming, nope, no, Democrats, they're not radical on abortion, and they're not for abortion on demand. The hilarious thing is, do you know that there's only one state where abortion on demand is allowed? Because federally it's allowed. But most states have some kind of restriction on it. Do you know which one doesn't? Chris Cuomo's state, New York. The one that he is sitting in as he says that there are no Democrats that are in favor on for abortion on demand. And you know what else is even more ironic about that? Do you know how New York got to that point? Because of a law that was signed, because of a bill that was signed into law by his brother, Andrew Cuomo. There was a bill that was put on his desk that said, we are erasing all protections for the unborn, and that abortion on demand is basically now a thing in New York City, in the state of New York, the only state that allows it. And it was Chris Cuomo's older brother that signed it into law. And so maybe you could make the case, if that weren't true. Yeah, maybe Chris Cuomo just misspoke, or he doesn't understand what is being said here. No, he's just straight up lying. So if you want to know why people call CNN fake news, that's a perfect example of it. Because Chris Cuomo, the brother of the man who signed abortion on demand into law in his home state, the brother of that man can get on CNN and say, there are no Democrats in favor of abortion on demand. It's not a thing. The news is lying to you and trying to cover for it. Because they know it looks bad. They know it makes them look bad. But they're hoping that you forget that when you go to the ballot box. I mean, really, this boils down to Chris Cuomo is lying because he understands that it makes his side look bad. Let's go to the chaplain's report.
In 1775, the Continental Congress created the Chaplain Corps. Under the command of General George Washington, each soldier was required to attend worship service every Sunday. While other armies advanced on their feet, Washington's troops advanced on their knees. It's time for the Chaplain's Report with Caleb Colquitt on tactics.
Chaplain's Report today. You are going to need a little bit of backstory on this one because it's a Old Testament story, but it's one that not as many people are familiar with. I want you to remember going into this that Moses never wanted to be the leader of Israel. Because if you'll remember back to the story of the burning bush, God calls Moses, and Moses is not real fond of that idea. In fact, there is almost an entire chapter of the Bible that's just Moses arguing with God and giving him all the excuses and reasons why he can't be the one to bring the children of Israel out of Egypt. Doesn't want to do it. So he basically gets dragged into this gig kicking and screaming doesn't want to be the leader of the Israelites. It's a burden he never wanted to bear. And then you fast forward to the Mount Sinai, and we see a picture of Moses praying to God that his wrath would be spared for the sin of creating the golden calf. He's praying to God to spare the Israelites because God suggests to him, you know what? I'm tired of it. I just got done bringing these people out of Israel, and already they're engaging in idolatry. They're already worshiping another god. I mean, it was like 5 minutes ago that they saw Pharaoh's army swallowed up by the Red Sea, and they're already creating other gods and worshiping them and saying that those are the gods that brought me out of Egypt, so I'm just going to wipe them off the face of the earth. And Moses is there pleading, God, don't do that. That's a really bad idea. Now, that's an oversimplification of that story, but that's not really what our story is about, so I can't go into all the details. But just remember, that is a thing that occurred, that Moses had to plead the case of the Israelites to God to prevent him from wiping them out. And then 2 chapters before this one, in Numbers 14, a very similar episode happens, where the children of Israel are murmuring, they're not following God's laws, they are talking bad about God and complaining, and God's fed up with them again, and Moses again goes to God and pleads their case to him and asks him not to pour out his wrath on the children of Israel. This is the point in the Bible where it's very clear that the children of Israel are just bound and determined to fuss about everything. And with the people grumbling here, they finally get to the point to where they try to overthrow Moses and Aaron, and this particular rebellion is led by a man named Korah. So even after all of this, they've decided that they know what's best for themselves, and they don't like the fact that Moses and Aaron are leading them through all this, and so they're just going to appoint new leaders. What we're going to do is we're going to get together and we're going to put Korah in Moses and Aaron's position, and we'll have Korah be the high priest, and then he's going to lead us into the promised land. And that really brings us to the verse that we're going to focus on today in Numbers 16, verses 20 through 22. Then the Lord spake to Moses and Aaron, saying, Separate yourselves from among this congregation, that I might consume them instantly. But they fell upon their faces and said, O God, of the Spirit, God of the spirits of all flesh, when one man sins, will you be angry with the entire congregation? So we see another episode where yet again Israel has done something really dumb, and God shows up and is really angry, and we have this time both Moses and Aaron pleading the case of the Israelites to God. It's a really fascinating exchange here, and I think one of the things that really highlights, that is one of the big highlights of this passage, is if this verse doesn't strike fear into your heart, then you didn't read it right. And I say that genuinely, because look at the way that first verse, the second verse there is talking about. It says, remove yourselves from this congregation so that I might consume them instantly. Now, that's more impactful if you know that a couple verses beforehand, one of the ways that God was getting ready to punish Israel is by sending a plague amongst them. And there was retribution for Israel acting foolishly in front of God and not following his will and his statutes and breaking the covenant that they had made with him on Sinai. Well, God's had enough. He has reached his limit. Now, understand, he doesn't really have limits in the same way we have limits, but you understand what I'm saying. Like, God has reached a point to where he believes that the children of Israel have reached a point where they are not going to listen to him. And so, to put this into human terms, this is the point where God has grabbed his belt. He's done hearing excuses. He's ready to delve out some punishment. And when he does this, he says, you know what? A plague is too slow. That is not an appropriate punishment for what these people have done. I'm tired of waiting. You guys get out of the way so that I can take them out right now. That's a terrifying verse. Christian, non-Christian, whatever. I mean, God is getting ready to delve out the punishment at this point. He is looking for a behind to whack with his belt. And the children of Israel are about to catch the full brunt of God's wrath. And yet here we have Moses and Aaron showing up and pleading their case and saying, Lord, you're not going to destroy the entire congregation for the actions of these people. And God explains to them, of course he's not going to do that. He says, I'm only going to get the ones that rebelled. And some people read this as that Moses and Aaron convinced God to do this. I don't really see it that way. I see it more as a, they were asking the question like, God, are you going to take out everybody for this? And he's saying, no, I'm not going to do that. Tell everybody to move away, and I'm about to delve out my punishment. But the core message remains that the kid gloves just came off. And God rolled up his sleeves and stuff is about to get set right. And that's something that we probably have all reached in our lives with God too. I know I have. That you've reached a point in your life to where God says, all right, this one's going to hurt, but it's going to be ultimately for your own good. I'm pretty sure I've been in that position before. I know that we don't have a direct dialogue with God the way that Moses and Aaron did, but I've felt that. And, you know, it's not an easy thing to recover from, but you do learn from it. And I think that this is really no different. Because you look at what has happened here, and the analogy of a father is very, very strong in this particular verse. Look at everything that God has done for them. If you look at this point up in Israelite history, he has already saved them from slavery. And by the way, didn't do it through causing a rebellion and some kind of armed resistance. No Israelites died, at least so far as we know. God just handled it. And the same thing happened with Pharaoh's army. God didn't even send them into battle and give them supernatural help. He just destroyed them for them. And then he brings them out into Sinai and gives them the blessing of his covenant and his law. And then he's taken them into the desert and he sweetened the waters so that they could drink. He's been giving them food every single day in the form of manna. He's already protected them from various Canaanites that have attacked and so on and so forth. Like, God has been there holding their hand every single step of the way, taking care of them, making sure that their needs are met, and creating this nation that is going to be a blessing into all the world, and they won't shut up. All they have done since the beginning of this journey is fuss and complain and whine. And so you can understand why God's finally like, you know what? It's time to take them out. I'm tired of it. I'm waiting for this generation to pass on anyway so that we can enter the promised land and do what I need done. It's time to just get rid of them. And when this rebellion happens, you'll notice that it is specifically rebellion that has caused God to be this was the straw that broke the camel's back when it came to God doling out his wrath. And I think that that is incredibly significant because you'll notice that they've done all these other things. They've fussed, they've whined, they've complained, but it's rebellion. When that happens, everybody better get out of the way because God's about to delve out some punishment. And what's significant about that is this wasn't a rebellion against Moses. It was kind of aimed at Moses and Aaron, but ultimately it was a rebellion against God. It was a rebellion against God's way of doing things, about God's decision not to bring people into the land of Canaan at the time that they wanted. They were ready. They thought they should be the ones to enter the promised land. And God's like, no, that's not the plan. And they say, well, you know what? If Moses and Aaron, they're telling us that that's not what God wants us to do, we're just going to do it ourselves. We're going to take care of it anyway. God's like, no, you don't either. That's really where we are in this story. And if you read the story of Korah, what really strikes about you is they're upset that Moses and Aaron, the way that they describe it is they have exalted themselves and they're saying it's time for us to really take over the priesthood and we want to be in your position. Moses didn't even want to be in his position. I mean, I'm sure that he's grown more accustomed to it than he did, way back at the burning bush where he was first starting out. But Moses didn't even want to be in this position. This isn't something that he coveted or longed for. He didn't want the burden of leadership. Moses probably would have been fine just being a shepherd out in the land of Midian. He probably would have been cool with living the rest of his life like that, having never even gone back to the children of Israel in Egypt. See, the difference here is they wanted the priesthood because of the prestige, and they wanted to grow their own power. God put Aaron and Moses in that position because they didn't want those things. And that's why I think that this is one that gets God so riled up. Because their response is, we're going to take over God's priesthood, the institution that God has put in place to bless his people and to oversee the worship of him. We're going to take over it so that we can get ours. It's like one of the televangelist preachers that gets into preaching to become a millionaire, to sell a whole bunch of books, and to be world famous. Well, you're kind of in it for the wrong reasons, and God does not look favorably upon that. You're wanting to use God's worship as a way to enrich yourself? Really? That's your plan. And so when you look at it in that light, you understand why God was so furious about all of this. And the irony here is that it is Moses and Aaron that are pleading for mercy for the rest of them. Because this is a proposal that God has already thrown out there, and I think that it was more of a teaching moment than he was actually contemplating it. But it was very possible for God to just bless the world and bring his son to bring salvation to mankind through Moses and Aaron. He could have just started over. He did it with Noah. Why not? He would have still kept the promise to Abraham. The lineage from Jesus to Abraham still would have been there if it had come through Moses and Aaron. That's certainly possible. But that's not what was important to Moses and Aaron. You see, they were in the position for the right reasons. They loved God and loved the children of Israel and wanted what was best for all parties involved. And that's the reason that they're saying, God, are you really sure you're going to destroy the entire congregation for the sins of these rebels? And then God, of course, explains to them, no, he's not going to do that. But the point is, when that happens, it is Moses and Aaron that are the ones that are compassionately worried about other people, whereas Korah just wanted to be in their position so he could worry about himself, and so he could do things the way he wanted to do. That's the difference in Moses and Aaron and Korah and the people that followed him. And then, of course, we know that the end of this story, what happens is that God has everybody in the congregation step away from Korah and his tents, and then the earth opens up and swallows them. That is swift justice, if there ever was one. This isn't the fiery serpents. This isn't God sending out a plague to slowly whittle them down. No, he takes them out right then. Takes no time at all. 1 minute they're there, the next minute they ain't. And it was just as simple as that. Because that is how God treats people that want to abuse the positions of power that he has set up. They want to abuse the worship of him and use it for their own ends. God does not take that lightly. And that's something that we would all do well to remember. And I think maybe the reason that he said it this way and gave that pause was to teach the lesson that I just gave you. And it was to teach that lesson to Moses. I don't think God ever had any intention of going after the people that had not rebelled against him, just the people in Israel that they may have been fussing and grumbling and moaning, but they weren't actually in open rebellion, and he always intended to only get Korah and his men. But I think the reason that God at least phrases it that way, to where Moses and Aaron had to ask that question, is to teach Moses and Aaron about mercy as well. You see, God is the ultimate teacher, and he never really stops teaching. Every moment is a teaching opportunity for him. And I thank God that he is that way, because we need a lot of learning and a lot of maturing to do. You see, God may dislike grumbling. He may dislike it when people complain about him. But when rebellion happens, that has to be dealt with very swiftly. And this story is an example of that. So, just like all human beings, I'm sure there are times where we don't feel like we're being treated right, and we may complain and fuss. And granted, we should keep that to a minimum, and the children of Israel are a great case study of that. But ultimately, we have to remember that there is a difference in that and open rebellion. And what you never wanted to do is be in open rebellion to God. That's a fight that you're never going to win. Stay the course, friends. Tactics is a production of News Radio 1440 and Cumulus Media Montgomery. Opinions expressed on this program are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Cumulus Media or our business partners. Graphics by Jessica Dawson. Video production by Jackson Dean. Broadcast studio provided by Faulkner University. Location studio provided by the Dalrata Church of Christ. Copyright